So I'm delighted, absolutely thrilled to invite Professor David Clutterbuck with us here today for today's session on trends in coaching and mentoring. As you know, Professor Clutterbuck is the co-founder and special ambassador for EMCC Global. And he, along with several greats in our profession, including David Megginson, who sadly passed away just recently, set up the original mentoring and coaching council back in 1992. And he's been actively involved in emerging this professional body to what it represents today, which is some 140, an amazing number of countries throughout the world. So it's an honor, as I say, to have David here today as the leader that he is in coaching and mentoring, and to share with us his insights into the future of our profession. And this he will do, I'm sure, with his own inimitable sense of humor. So there you go, David.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. It's almost giving me, but I have to resist the temptation to go too far into humor. It gets me into trouble from time to time. So these are some of the themes that I thought, well, this is one of the first themes that I thought that we could do. We seem to have jumped a slide into the second slide into the show, which is a really great start. There we go. There we go. But it's a bit like a coaching conversation. If you know where it's going, it's not coaching. I guess some of these my presentations are like that too. I'm not really sure where it's going, but we'll have some fun getting there. These are the kind of things we're going to briefly cover. We're going to be talking about some of the coaching myths and how the increasing trend, particularly within the EMCC and academia, to challenge those myths. Some of the new applications that we see or applications which have been around for a little while but have really suddenly taken off in recent years. The issue of coach maturity, where we have a major continuing research project with Bob Garvey and a whole group of other people looking at transitions to maturity for coaches. We'll look at the coming potential and threat from AI. And we'll look at team coaching and teams and teams. And with that list of things, we're not going to go into enormous depth, but I hope that will come in the session when you break out. So just looking at coaching myths, you'll be familiar with a lot of these, and the work that's been happening, much of it through the EMCC and its networks on so much stuff that's assumptions that have come from people, from the top of people's heads without evidence, and the push to have clear evidence, it was interesting that Sir John Whitmore, before he died, having promoted the GROW model for so long, said that before he died, he felt that it really should have been the VRO model for V, because people often don't know what their goals are until they're halfway through the coaching assignment. So a lot of the work that has been done over recent years has really looked at goals and said, actually, if the goals don't evolve but during a coaching assignment, you're probably doing something wrong. And so we're beginning to understand that goal setting and goal achievement are not the simplistic matter that is that's represented in so much of the literature and or the simplistic literature, and also some of the expectations of what coaches do from other professional bodies. Coaching needs to be solutions focused. The evidence we have is no, it doesn't. There's a need for a solution within the coaching session comes from the coach, not from the client. The client's need is to have thought things through to a much deeper level, and they may come to a conclusion in the session, but it's after the session when they do their deeper thinking that the real value comes out of it. Now, of course, you can interpret the methodologies within solutions-focused coaching have great value, but the notion that it's all about finding solutions for the client, again, it's all about the coach. we all know that this myth that coaching is non-directive and mentoring is directive comes from the attempt by primarily American coaches, but also many in Europe, as coaching suddenly emerged and found itself competing with mentoring, which was usually done for free. People trying to say, well, how do we add some value? Well, let's create this myth. And of course, all of the literature, the evidence-based literature on mentoring, going back for thousands of years, has mentoring as a highly non-directive form of questioning, using one's wisdom to help somebody else become wise. And all of the history of coaching from its very early origins, back in as a joke in the novels of Thackeray in 1851, have been about directive behaviors until the work of Timothy Galway began to push it into the direction that we know now. And coaching as we now know it is actually something radically different from its origins. And it's great that we see coaching and mentoring increasingly as a trend becoming integrated. And indeed, from some of the work that we're doing right now in the maturity area, it becomes clear that John Leary Joyce's definition of mentoring as coaching plus, so having all the skills of a coach, but having that extra knowledge that you can bring to bear to ask a bit deeper questions from that knowledge, to empathize more with the situation that the other person has, to have presence and gravitas because of your knowledge. Those are, I think, a key matter or key part, the integration of coaching and mentoring. The idea that coaches should take copious notes, again, proselytized all over the place, but no evidence. And all of the evidence we do have from neuroscience now tells us that if you're taking notes, you're not listening, or it's much harder to listen. So how do you manage it? Good practice we now see, of course, is to listen intently and to stop every now and then and ask the client, what would you like to capture from what we've been saying? When we do that, we put the authority, the power, the control in their hands, not in our hands, which is, of course, exactly the way it should be. The idea that a good coach, can coach anybody in anything, patently untrue, extremely dangerous. Again, it's a piece of non-evidential assumptions. Coaching is a process. It's not. Coaching is more about, if you emphasize the process, you're emphasizing the doing. We know that as coaches mature, it becomes more about the being, in the integration of who you are with what you do. And the process is simply a toolkit that you use. And then the number of hours coaching, being a good guide to coaching efficacy, zero correlation, but no statistically significant correlation whatsoever. And the client's the focus of the coaching? No, not as we realize it now. The client and within their systems are the focuses for coaching, as we'll see as we go along in a little while. So those are just some of the things where we're challenging unevidenced areas. And in some of those trends that we're new applications, maternity mentoring is much more accurately new parent mentoring. I was had this morning a call into Australia, where the program there in the accountancy profession there, a third of the people are men taking parenting leave. And this is great. But what it does, it improves the chance of people coming back. It makes it faster to get back into the workplace. And you're much more likely to retain them for a longer period afterwards. And the key difference between maternity coaching and maternity mentoring, as they're defined, as their practice, is coaching tends to be somebody who's an expert on the topic, who's outside the company. Mentoring is somebody who's inside the company and is an expert on the company and the way that it works and all the means and the way the culture is changing and so forth. There's value in both. But in our experience, people actually prefer, or mums in particular, like to have somebody who's been through the same experience in the same environment. So there's no absolutes here, but there's no such thing as an absolute, I like to say, but you can look at the irony of that later. Then we've got ethical mentoring. So this is a growing area. In the health service in the UK, we have over 200 trained ethical mentors. They work with people who might become whistleblowers. Have you got an ethical dilemma? How are you going to deal with it? And they basically use an ethical decision-making framework to supplement their coaching. so they're able to enable that person to really think things through and make choices which are good for the person and for the organization. And what it's doing is making it easier for organizations to overcome the fear of speaking out. And so for leaders, this is a valuable adjunct to the way that they behave. And to the organization, it just gives you a much clearer way of seeing the things that nobody talks about because it's too difficult. So we can basically talk about it as being helping others to make better decisions at work that affect the well-being of others. And others could not just be human beings, it could be the planet, for example. It's a moral context, resolving conflict between business and social imperatives. And these three elements. Is there an ethical issue here? How do we evaluate the options that we have? And do the decisions meet up with ethical guidelines? And the EMCC led the way in terms of codes of conduct and ethical guidelines in coaching and in mentoring. And I think what we're now seeing from a broader perspective is we can take not just our code of conduct and our ethic code into the workplaces, but we can also take the mode of thinking. How do we help leaders become more ethical leaders? And for me, that's a big trend that we're seeing in supervision. Time and time again, we're getting coaches saying, I want to help make the leaders that I work with more ethically minded.
David, may I ask you, what caused this to become important right now, do you think?
Well, I think it started in the financial services sector when there was the great crash, all the scandals of the collapse in the financials, in the banks and so forth. And when people looked at it, people were making very poor and unethical decisions. And the gut reaction of banks was to, in particular, was we'll do some training of people around ethical guidelines, and we'll increase the amount of money we put into compliance. Had zero impact. Right. And so it's much more about how do you actually help people to really think things through from an ethical perspective. And the health services and organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, a great EMCC member, have really embraced this concept of making ethical decision making a core competence for coaches. Uh-huh. So I think that there's a great deal of value here in giving people that sense of being really able to work within an ethical framework. Mm-hmm. So it's not just sticking to the rules; it's actually how do you think things through in a good, positive, both intellectually and emotionally right way, if we put it that way. Mm-hmm.
So it's more just governance.
Absolutely, yes. And one of the I've just earlier this year I did was an external examiner for somebody whose thesis was basically a case study where they'd taken the compliance department of a major organization, financial services organization, and they basically helped them to reshape everything that they did so that it became ethical coaches across the organization. And compliance suddenly, people suddenly started talking to, they'd stop and talk to somebody from compliance in the corridor, or even sit down and have lunch with them. Something, everybody would try and avoid them like the plague up until that point. So I think we can see some real changes in organizations, and it's being driven by coaching. I've talked about maturity very briefly, and there's so much we could say here. The working party we've got at the moment is looking in detail at the transitions between one stage and the next. And I put Keegan and Lasky's models here. Many of you will be highly familiar with this, how we grow as human beings. So in how we define ourselves, our identity, so basically our socio-emotional maturity and our cognitive maturity. And what we're seeing here, that there's a very strong parallel here between how people mature as people, as human beings, but also as how coaches mature and what they let go of. And it seems to be a process of doing less, being far less process oriented, letting go of the need to control, letting go of the need to have very specific goals, And the more as people make each transition towards greater maturity, they reflect a lot more. In my work with school children, I'm trying to promote the idea that we should have reading, writing, arithmetic, and reflection. And we have a target to get 5 million school-age coaches and mentors. We hope to make a lot more progress of this later this year. Now we're getting out of COVID rather. One of the chapters in the materials for the kids is how to mentor your parents, which I think is always rather fun. So many of you will be familiar with this model, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what this model basically does is move from this models-based process where you're doing coaching to somebody, to a process-based process where you are doing something coaching with somebody, to a philosophy-based process or approach where it's about integrating who you are with what you do as a coach. And the systemic eclectic, where you transcend all of this. And what you do is you hold the client where they have the conversation that they need to have with themselves. And we see this evolution happening, and the coaches the highly experienced coaches we've been interviewing, we see these patterns in their story, and we want to put a lot more meat behind this. What actually enables you to move from one to the other? We don't have the answers yet, but I'm hoping we'll have more answers over the coming year or two. One of the things that we see in terms of this maturity is our compassion. And I love these 4 things: thinking about how we feel, thinking about how we feel, feeling about how we think, feeling about how we feel. This notion that our self-awareness is a critical part of this. And one of the questions that I now like to ask coaches in supervision is, well, what did you do since we last met to increase your self-awareness? And that's a really challenging question. So what did you do? We should be demonstrating, we should be role models for self-awareness in our clients, because if we're not doing it, how will they? And I've just read a beautiful book called Super Senses, which is a scientific combination of the massive research around the senses outside of the basic 5 that we have. So, beyond touch, sight, sound, smell, and so forth, and taste. We have 32 senses identified through research so far. That's quite daunting, isn't it? And being aware of the different senses that we have, like for example, there is a different sense in play when we put pressure on ourselves than when we stroke ourselves or stroke somebody else. There are completely different circuits involved and different organisms involved in the skin just for those 2 senses. So being more sensorily aware, being aware of our identity, or the senses give us our sense of identity. So it deepens our identity. And I think this whole issue of compassion is important here. And I love this question: if we're irritated by somebody else, a client or somebody else, would I be feeling like this if I could be more compassionate towards them? If I were more compassionate towards them, how might that change the way they behave? And could you be kinder to somebody you disapprove of? How compassionate is your ideal self? And a real thing that we introduce so much into team coaching, when things get sticky, what's the most generous thing that I or we could do right now or think right now? And these the ability to develop our compassion, to use compassion powerfully, is, I think, a major thing for coaches, a growing area of knowledge. And if we're going to do that, we need to be more compassionate with ourselves. And so, what kindness can you do for yourself? And I love this question: what would somebody who deeply loves me say to me right now? It's a great question. If we look beyond into the more complexity of the coaching that we're doing, when we have a models-based coach, they would tend to go client's got a problem, let's find them a solution. When we get to the next level of coaching maturity, we would say, all right, the client, let's understand their situation and the values they apply to it, and maybe a solution will emerge. When we get to being a coach, we look at the values of the client first, the context, then we look at the coaching relationship. And from this, we find emergent ways forward, which may or may not contain a solution. And the systemic eclectic coaches, they look at the client within the client system to begin with. They try and understand the context of the systems applying here. Then they look at the coaching relationship, the emergent ways forward, and they tend to leave with emergent questions, the half-formed questions that the client is going to work on in between sessions, so that they come back with a different question for the next session. These of course, these are stereotypes, and it isn't always like that. But I think it's quite useful to think about it in these terms of emergence. And then we talk about wisdom. Well, this has great connection with the AI thing, because robots are quite good about doing very task-specific wisdom. They can accumulate all sorts of knowledge, far more than the human can. But broad wisdom, reflecting on life experience, that really belongs in the realm of the human being. And meta wisdom belongs in the world of the wise human being. And it allows us to take knowledge and experience and so forth from multiple sources and look and find patterns within and across those sources. And it's that multiplicity, that complexity of our thinking that basically will distinguish human beings, at least certainly during my lifetime, and I think for many generations to come. We hope, but at the moment we don't have wise computers. And so if people the question becomes, will we be replaced by robots? And the answer is probably not, or at least not if we maintain our focus at those mature levels. And I'll come back to that as we go. But basically, CoachBots can do all of these things. We're working on it. We're in the process of developing a whole app, and it's not a fully fledged AI for helping for coach development. And an obvious thing to come out of that is for supervisor development. But if you're going to, helping people reflect before their coaching session and after their coaching session or supervision. So there's a lot of potential to support what we do. But look at this AI therapist, can do all of these things, register micro expressions, so things that you don't notice, and signs of stress. While they're analyzing patterns, they can still be talking to the person. They can do loads of things in parallel. We can only do one thing at a time. You've got this amazingly accurate record. You can look at the language that was used. They don't have loads of interference from outside. And surprisingly, or perhaps not so surprisingly, in the case of this using with war trauma victims, people feel less judged by the computer than they do by a human being. We've got some real tough competition here. Now, the reality of this is that people at the grow model level, where we're using simplistic tools, are highly at risk, because this can already be done in large part by the coach bots that exist now, and will certainly be much better as we get more AI involved with those coach bots. But anything that's a predictable pattern, if you're following the process, and the process is predictable, then you can be replaced.
David, there's a question in the chat which refers to how coaching success will be measured in this brave new world.
Great, I love it. Wow. I think that's one of the things we have to research, we could answer this in 50 different ways, but I'll answer it from one particular way. We measure coaching. If you measure coaching success by, did the client come away with a solution to their problem, we are adding no more value than if we were a consultant, and that's still adding value, of course. But if what comes out of the coaching is a significant impact on the client's team, and the function of the team, that's a lot more value. And if what comes out of it is on the wider system, again, we're adding value. And all the way through, I think we have to evolve the way that we measure away from these simplistic. So was it a nice session, and did anything? Did you learn anything? Did anything change? To what's the impact, and ultimately, what's the impact on the whole world, on the economy? So one of the things that increasingly we're working on within supervision, coach supervision, is how do we help the leaders that we coach become good ancestors? And it's a great book, The Good Ancestor, by the way. But the thesis behind that is very simple. When your grandchildren's children look back at you, will they regard you as some of today's generations that regard slave traders, in the way that will they see that you profligated the resources of the world around you and created more poverty? Or will they see you as first person who created a utopia for them? I think that's a really powerful question. So it's as big as you want to make it, basically. I'll skip through some of the other things that people medium risk, basically behavioral change coaching, supervisors who can't integrate AI into their practice, and low risk, anything that focuses on wisdom. Basically, as soon as we get that, the more that we're using ourselves as human beings and putting ourselves into it, the more the less the risk we have. But the dangers are working with an AI. Do we actually sideline the client, because the coach and the AI are talking to each other all the time, and the client doesn't really get the attention they need? Or on the other side, are you being overwhelmed as a coach by all the data that the AI is producing for you? And there's this issue of the process and the confidentiality issues. If your AI is holding all that data, and you're then taking that data off to supervision, for example, and it's showing that data is being shared with the supervisor's AI, or maybe the client themselves has got an AI and they've shared some of their thinkings and musings with you as well. Where are the boundaries? Where are the rules on this? And we don't have any ethical data, any ethical codes to cover this yet.
David, there's another question from the chat you might be interested in.
Yeah.
Can AI do team coaching? The answer is yes, is it?
It can support team coaching. It can do all that stuff up front of rote surveys if you want to do them. I mean, we're getting some increasing evidence now that just coming into it to a team and saying, right, we're going to do a Hogan diagnostic or this diagnostic or that one, actually makes for worse team coaching, because it only reveals, you focus all your attention on the things that the survey is designed to identify, rather than the things that are actually the drivers of that team's success.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it can be much more. It can save you a lot of time gathering data and doing the first pass analysis of data, but on its own, it's not good enough.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've seen this explosion of team coaching we had over 1,300 students on a program we launched last year of team coach training, and it's largely because teams, everything is moving to organizations can't afford to focus on one-to-one. In fact, the more that we look at we did a survey and we found of HR people, of coaches and leaders, and overwhelmingly people said, actually, the focus on one-to-one has to radically change, because the success of organizations really lies within the team, not in the individual hero. I have to say that one of the worrying things about that survey was that although the vast majority of coaches agreed with that position, the proportion of coaches who agreed with that was lower than the proportion of the HR and the leaders. And so there's a lag here in some coaches in catching up with this major trend. What we're trying to do with team coaching, we're trying to future-proof the team. We're trying to raise their understanding and the clarity of what's going on in their dynamics, so they can make better decisions. And the aim of a team coach is to basically make yourself obsolete, to know that they've absorbed the behaviors to be able to coach themselves. And then if we take that a little bit further, it isn't team building. It's not team facilitation or strategy away days or coaching the members of the team individually. It's about applying coaching principles to the team's dynamics. And one of the things that we've learned is team building is at root about helping people get on together. And that's good. It's a positive thing. We can incorporate it in team coaching, but it doesn't necessarily have any significant impact on performance. We can't find any really valid studies that link team performance over a period with team building. It's not team facilitation. The facilitator comes in to deal with a specific issue and focus on that issue. The team coach is building capacity and capability in the team to solve many other problems in the future. So it's like you give somebody a fish or a fishing rod. And the standards, the EMCC was, as usual, was way ahead of in its work on the team coaching standards. We've now got 4 levels of team coaching in the standards, which really closely define the competence, not just the competencies you need, but the experience, the essence of being able to work at these levels. And at Foundation, it's really about helping teams to become team literate or team leaders to coach through their teams. But gradually, it's more and more about being an effective team coach. We estimate on not a lot of evidence, but we went out and tried to get as evidence we could, that there will be a need over the next 4 to 5 years, for 150,000 team coaches around there. That's more than there are qualified coaches at the moment. So there's some real interesting dynamics here. That is what the world needs, but whether the world understands that need is not, and is prepared to pay for it, and when the supply are going to be there is not. But we suspect the vast majority of team coaches within a few years' time will be being produced within companies as part of line manager education. And that's, I think it's actually a good thing, because then when you really want to work on the most difficult things, that's when you bring in your expert professional from outside.
Was that 150,000 globally, David?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, but it's one of these figures which we put together by trying to extrapolate from different ways. It has no validity other than face validity and an agreement by people roughly that feels right from various audiences. We've done, when we go beyond teams, we go to teams of teams, and we're increasingly seeing an emerging whole area of work for coaches. If you've got lots of experience with working with individual teams, to working with a collection of teams, just like a school of fish or a flock of birds can change direction without banging into each other. How do we make that happen in organizations? And we're beginning to do quite a lot of research around this. For me, this is a major area of interest. And then the last things I'd like to focus on really are the democratization and decolonization of coaching. Coaching thinking has been dominated by cultural assumptions from the West, and particularly from North America. But we're seeing increasing pushback from Asia Pacific, from Africa, and else, and from the Gulf countries, of saying, actually, we have our own ways of looking at this. This is not the only way. And for the example I like to give is, if you start a cold conversation with in the manner that's advised by some of the other professional bodies, that you start off right, you've got to say, well, what would you like to discuss? What do you want to achieve from today? Well, that's okay, but then that pushes somebody into putting the goal up front. You go to some other cultures, and they start by saying, I'm not really sure that I understand the issue fully, but I'd like to start by painting the picture. So you work from the outside in, gradually putting in the squares into the jigsaw until you get to the center. And by the time you get to the center, you've identified what the goal is, but you've also identified the solution. We see there are multiple ways in which we can construct coaching, as long as it's a meaningful conversation. And so this cultural domination, I think the great thing about this, the EMCC, is it comes from a background of diversity, and therefore the ability to absorb and recognize and value diverse ways of coaching, such as Ubuntu coaching from Africa, is an important part of our USP, and one we should not wish to lose. And we got most of the research in coaching comes from North America and Europe. We tend to reinforce those cultural assumptions because people don't see the culture they're in unless you step outside of it. And I like this issue about, is coaching a profession or a vocation? I was on a panel an international panel with a bunch of everybody else was from the States, and every other presenter was focusing on how do you earn more money as a coach. And that just all, of course, you make yourself more efficient, you get more qualifications, all this, but it's all about earning more money. And I'm thinking, is that really what we're about? Or are we a vocation? And I think we have to question whether we are vocational, we have a vocation in which we apply professional standards, or whether we are simply a profession making money. That's really for everybody's conscience. But I think at an EMCC level, we've got some really interesting debates to have on that. And this whole thing about decolonization, the people who get coaching are the privileged elite. How do we make sure, how much of our energy and effort should we be putting into making sure that coaching gets to the people who need it most in the favelas and the villages of Africa? What's our responsibility for making coaching a much more democratic, wider spread gift to the world? So this,
in that case, sorry to interrupt. In that case, David, that would put us in the realm of a social movement.
I think that's the debate that we need to be having. Yes. I think we can be professional, we can earn a living, but we can still at the same time be a social movement. I'm not going to do the last slide because the things are all I think fairly self-evident, except because I now mentioned most of them. But coaching and mentoring as life skills, I do think the place to start teaching coaching and mentoring is in the schools. We're seeing this trend increasingly, and I'm doing everything I can to encourage it. But I think this is something that we, as a movement, if we like, a social movement, should be deeply engaged with as well. So I've gone on slightly longer than I intended, but here we go. There we are. Let's over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to break you out now then into breakout rooms. Please, again, flag if you don't want to go into a breakout room. And we'd like you to explore two questions. So what key trends do you see emerging? And secondly, what can EMCC Global do to address these trends? So how should EMCC Global respond to, influence, or lead these trends? So those have been posted into the chat. So I'll just repeat them. What key trends do you see emerging? And how should EMCC Global respond to, influence, or lead these? So we're going to put you into breakout rooms now. Nicola, thank you. And you will have 20 minutes in the rooms. So now then, the invitation is for you to capture your thoughts from the breakout rooms into the chat box. So we're going to give you 1 minute for this. So that means please being succinct and capturing those thoughts very clearly so that I can then read them and replay them back again. So, okay, ready? 1 minute then, please post your thoughts. Quite a lot about well-being and mental health issues. Navigating the boundary between coaching and counselling. We also had a comment about life coaches before as well. Systemic coaching. and also what's needed from EMCC: tools, methodology, systems, subscription, and in the area of AI, need from EMCC making AI coaching bots more human. Working with different cultures and contexts. Music.
I hope too many people are not taken in by my April Fool's blog that we did last year about the first AI coach to get accredited, which quite a few people did take seriously.
So there's something about sustainability, yeah. Influence, EMCC could influence better regulation of the profession, true. Coaching global teams, regional variances and norms. There's quite a bit about culture. Good. Danger of professional coaching being confused with life coaching. Yep, that's come up a couple of times.
Yeah.
More focus.
Yeah. Just to comment on that one, I absolutely agree. We during the break, we were talking about the Jenny and I were talking about what I call zones of acceptability, and so what's over here that's unacceptable, what's over there that's unacceptable, but where is the zone in the middle, which is the sweet spot to be, if you take the legal profession, I mean, there are some wonderful people doing some amazing positive things in the legal profession, but personally, I wouldn't like to have the impact of going to a party and say, "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm a lawyer." If there's this sort of immediate negative perception, and equally at the other extreme, that there are other more fluffy things. We've had to. I know one of the issues that came up a while ago was somebody applying to join EMCC as an astrological coach, which is just completely over. Fortunately, that's a great that quite an easy one, because that would affect the reputation of the profession. It was not ethical. So yeah, I don't know. There's a space here that's the right space, and what we call it and how we maintain ourselves in that space, I think, is an interesting area for consultation and discussion.
There's something about hybrid working, which we're hearing a lot of, working virtually, social aspect, this social movement has come into play. Room 22, Jacek Beldwowski, if I've said that accurately. Would you like to perhaps expand a bit about what your room spoke about? We like the fact that EMCC focuses on social aspect of coaching, mentoring, and we want to see more of it.
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate. I think this is very unique for EMCC on that front, maybe because it's almost a volunteer organization. So we said we really were pleased to see that social aspect on Professor Clutterbuck's slides. And then we ask ourselves, is the question what EMCC can do about this right question? Because basically EMCC is a very small organization and largely based on volunteers. So how much power we have? And maybe the question is more to us, what we can do as EMCC coaches. Rather than rely on the so-called headquarters, which really has no such firepower to change the world. But what EMCC can do, and one of our colleagues in the room mentioned that, is trigger the researches about that, is trigger the discussion about that, is showing some good examples. So being kind of a spark, kind of a torchbearer. This is the discussion. Let's discuss it. And then local chapters can handle that, can take it and go. And I gave an example that, this solidarity coaching idea came from, let's say, Global EMCC. But then some volunteers in Poland in our local small organization, we have probably 120 EMCC certified coaches. And somebody said, okay, I will take it. I like it. What we can do, what are the limits? And we are now having few foundations that we are working with on this solidarity coaching. So we combine our professional time with the pro bono time. But it's good to have some maybe not guidelines, inspiration, thought sharing, this kind of arena when we can say, okay, how do you do this in UK, in Norway, in Kenya, and how we do it in Poland, what we can learn from each other. So I think I see EMCC as more a forum, a platform, and place to go.
Yeah.
So
thank you. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I got that. Thank you. I'm just wondering if we can hear from Andrew Amor, who actually posted the question, are we changing the world now, or some such question. Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Really enjoyable, really enjoyable session and points. Yeah, I think it's just, as a profession, I think there's just, I would have thought that we, as a profession, we're going to be careful that we don't become another NGO, another social movement. There's a lot of social movements. And I think there's if you are a member of a law society or an accountants group, I'm sure there's ethical things they bring in. There's things about environmental things and equity and all those good things, but that's not the purpose. That's not the purpose of those organizations. If you join a law society or an international society of marketers or any of these organizations, the organization is to help the profession, it's not to change the world. Now, if the profession is ethical, then obviously it will have positive things. But I think you've got to be careful that we don't get too distracted on that. That we don't get too distracted to be a political movement. We're not Greenpeace. It's not green. I don't think coaching profession is Greenpeace. That's Greenpeace. Greenpeace. Yes.
Yeah, we
do those sorts of things.
We're not Extinction Rebellion.
No, we're not Extinction Rebellion. but I think if you're, I'm a member of various marketing and law groups. Of course, you talk about how do you have sustainable marketing and sustainable legal services and ethical things. But it's not campaigning to go to the United Nations and have David Clutterbuck stand at the United Nations talking about how we've all got to change.
God, I'd hate that. No, not because I'm afraid
we'll send you to the United Nations and the EU.
Yes.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to jump in here and say anything to this? Because it's a big question, isn't it? Keeps coming up now. Anyone else got a view they'd like to share? I'm sure you've got views. Do you want to share them? Anyone? I can't see the whole screens.
Hello, Jenny. Yes, I'm just.
Hi.
How are you? Yeah, good.
Good, thank you.
Good. Yeah, just would like to share something quickly. My personal view. I mean, in a way, it doesn't matter so much, but I think Andrew, you really touched on something important, and I think this is a point which divides a lot of coaches. I mean, from what I hear, some believe that, yes, coaches have to claim their social beliefs, and some others think the opposite. So I think absolutely it's a key topic at the moment. So, yes.
There isn't going to be a right answer to this. There never is in an ethical debate. There's a series of answers of various levels of acceptability. But I'd like to put two analogies just to widen it out. One analogy is if you're a company making whatever product it is, you can choose that company to say we want to be an ethical company, and therefore we will actually focus our attentions on things that are not going to do any harm to the environment, that are going to improve social good. So we will select the ways that we make money to be as socially responsible as possible. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is you're coaching the chief executive of a company, and you realize that that company is basically their strategy is would deeply involve wiping out large bits of the Amazon, for example, or if to plant soya crops or whatever. So that they're social. They say we're being socially responsible. We're moving people towards soya, but actually we're doing it at the expense of vast swathes of the natural environment. What's your responsibility there as a coach? Should you say, I'm not, could you say, well, I cannot support you and help you to do this terrible thing? Or should you say, well, look, my responsibility is to help you to make sure that you're thinking about the social consequences of this. And it's up to you what you do. My role stops at providing clarity. You make your decisions. Or should you say, it's none of my business. I'm just here to earn a crust by doing what I do well as a coach and helping you to be more effective in your role, even though that role may be doing harm. You've got three different scenarios here. I don't think we have any clarity about what that means for us as collectively as coaches or individually.
Yeah. Thank you. Christina, you've been patiently waiting with your hand up. Do you want to add something to this?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. There was an interesting discussion in our breakout room about clients turning to us more in between sessions. And it's kind of a leaning into us for guidance, support, and so on. And it was both for coaching and mentoring. And I was just wondering to what extent this whole crisis and our clients' enhanced needs could perhaps, take us from a role of a coach or mentor into the savior and touch a bit into our, profession shadow. So I just wanted to put this on the table because I felt it was a present risk.
Yeah,
sure.
Indeed it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure lots of us share that concern. Because we're only, after all, human beings. So I'm going to move. Thank you all for your contributions to that debate. I'm sure that will be ongoing for some time, but I'm going to move to a different comment now in the chat box, which was from Frank McMahon. What's needed from EMCC lobbying to make the term executive coach protected in law? I would like to hear from you on that one, if I may.
Hi, everybody. Frank McMahon here.
Hi, Frank.
The other side of my existence is I'm a qualified CPA, and I'm based in the Republic of Ireland. Mm-hmm. But one of the bugbears that I have in relation to my normal job is that the term accountant isn't statutorily protected in Ireland. So even though I've gone through a formalized exam procedure and I have to have professional indemnity insurance and the oversight of a recognized accountancy body, there's no protection in the term accountant. So other people can use it who are not qualified. Now, I also have my coaching business as well. Mm-hmm. And what I'm afraid is, as this profession becomes more mainstream, as it becomes more acceptable, as it becomes more widely available, or as we were saying, less colonized, that there will be people entering into the space who will hold themselves out as business and executive coaches, and there will be no protection of the use of the term business and executive coaching, or business and executive coach. And I just think that the institutes, whether it's the EMCC or the ICF or whoever, should start to lobby governments to protect this profession and protect the people who have gone through formalized training and who have a requirement then to do continual professional education, to be supervised, and to have insurance requirements. Because we all know ourselves, the last thing that we want are non-qualified, non-regulated people providing this type of a service. Because as we know, if you get it wrong, it could be quite damaging.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I think.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Yeah,
and will protect the human beings and let AI do whatever AI wants to do.
Yeah, very, very good point. Thank you. I'd like to bring Pedro in, Pedro Panos, if you would like to build on this.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm here from Brazil, and I'm loving this discussion, the opportunity to hear David and all the people here. And I think this reflection is very, very instigating for me, because I see almost every industry has changed along the 10, 20 years from 10 to 20 years from now, innovating and disrupting and everything. And I see myself that coaching, it seems to be unchanged. The principles are the same and everything the same. So when David put some flashes here, this changed my mind too much to reconsider many things. And I guess how can we change to think together to move, to adapt, and to upgrade to this new world? How can we contribute updated to this new world? And how and what should we do to improve this kind of approach we have, and to be paced for this context we are living now?
Do you have the answers? If so, please share. But does anyone want to add anything into the debate about the need for some kind of protection, for want of a better word, really, around the term executive coaching, or any of the other points that Pedro's raised? Does anyone want to add? Because I think there is a danger that, and there has been for as long as I've been in the profession, that people are practicing untrained and certainly not accredited. And I see it all the time. And they might, they call themselves coaches and they're clearly not.
Hi, this is Olivia. Actually, if I may, accreditation is a good way to get our professionalism recognized. That's why the EMCC is so important, because the accreditations get recognized globally. And I think this is really important. In different countries, there are different regulations, but the EMCC accreditations are global. So that's quite a good recognition. What do you think? And about the professionalism, so we would encourage professional coaches to get accredited.
Yeah. It's interesting about the point about getting it embedded in law, because that is that's going a step beyond where everything is now.
True. And in France,
what anyone else
in France, they have been quite far in that area, I believe. EMCC is fairly involved, I think, in France. Get recognition at legislative or regulated, at least, maybe not the law, but the regulation, and some other countries as well.
Thank you. Mary Cahill, would you like to say something?
Yeah, hi. I just I know that the BPS are thinking about bringing out a qualification or a role of a coaching psychologist, and I wondered how the EMCC were going to, if they are involved in that, and whether they're going to support that, and how people can be almost, I think what the expression used to be, grandfathered into a new it's a good thing in one way to have a coaching psychology qualification and status, but will that leave then people who are currently qualified and highly qualified perhaps out of that criteria? It's a new world, and I'm just wondering.
Do you have a view on that, David?
I've got a concern that if we go too far in that route, we start limiting the scope of coaching and mentoring in the community. So that's, we want school teachers to have coaching and mentoring skills. We want line managers to have all of these skills. So if we try, and so we have to be very careful that however if we do go down this route, that we have that it doesn't become elitist and actually a guild to keep people out. So that's the other side of the point. Yeah. The other thing that I think really concerns me is that there are quite a few different accreditation methods out there. And without getting into detail, because it wouldn't be appropriate, but looking at doing coach assessment centers of coaches with apparently equivalent accreditations, we consistently find that the coach assessment centers, 70% of the coaches who've got accreditation can't even do the basics of coaching. Now, I think that's improving. We haven't done one for 2 or 3 years, but over a 10-year period, that figure was consistent on pretty much every coach assessment center that was done. I think that raises some questions around, if anybody can accredit, then how do you know that? Which accreditation do you take? All accreditations? We're into a bit of a minefield here, and I don't think there's a simple answer. But I do think it's a question that has to be answered or asked.
Because it's welcomed on one hand, but then it can be detrimental on the other hand.
Yeah, I mean, if the accreditation process is based primarily on answering a few tick boxes and then and the number of hours that you've done, that's equally invalid, because there's no correlation statistically between the number of hours of coaching is done and their competence as a coach.
So this raises as well the bigger issue about democratization of coaching, really. If we're trying to get this out everywhere, we don't want to create any more barriers to entry. Yeah, it's a fine balance, this whole debate, isn't it?
Well, one of the things that's been floated, and I don't, it's too early to have an opinion, for me personally have an opinion about it, is the idea that we might look at associate coaches. So some kind of associate accreditation, but that might undermine the formal accreditations. But I'm thinking particularly of the village elder in the middle of Kenya, or the 16-year-old school kids who we're training to be coaches and mentors, who are amazingly good. I mean, they're better than many of the adults we've seen. That they take to it naturally. So I think we have to be ever so careful that whatever we do actually achieves the result that we want.
Rolf, we'll hear from you, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think we can look at making a distinction between looking at how people can get some form of qualification, accreditation as coaches, versus teaching people coaching skills and inviting them to use coaching skills in whatever other profession they have. And I'd like to make that distinction. The teacher using coaching skills is a different situation than an executive coach trying to earn their living as an executive coach. And so I think we need to recognize the those who are in this space so full-time, versus all of those that we'd like to use more coaching skills than they use today, and make that easy for them to learn about this and sort of develop without ever wanting to become a full-time coach. And I think we need to look at these two things in parallel, and maybe that could be an avenue to say, here's a more formal accreditation, even more formal than what exists today. And here's a space where people can develop and grow without necessarily seeking accreditation.
Yeah, I think that there's a parallel here between learning maths at school. Everybody learns maths at school and can do some, or most people can do some form of adding up, but they don't all go on to become chartered accountants.
Yeah. Okay, quickly, Tim, because we've got to wrap up. Just
quickly.
One second.
I completely agree with Rolf. Yes, I would just like to underline how important it is to each leader, each manager, to put into his professional toolbox this tool, which is manager in the role of coach. And I would underline not only the role of coach, but how to coach the teams. I think quite a lot of people are looking towards one-to-one coaching, but I find that the teams are really missing this particular skill from their leaders. Team coaching.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. That was very rich. I think we could have carried on all day. What we will now do is we will be summarising back to you at a certain point and up into the executive of the EMCC Global. What were the themes that emerged out of today's conversation? Some of them, and I haven't been through the whole chat yet, some of them I've captured are the social aspects, AI, culture. There was a lot about culture, a lot about health and well-being, hybrid working and new changes in the workplace, whole thing about self-awareness and reflection, and then, of course, about team working. So there are more in there. Nicola and I will go through it with a fine-tooth comb and then report back to you on that. So again, thank you everyone so much for your contribution. It's been extraordinarily interesting and very, very rich conversation. And thank you for your contribution to EMCC strategy going forward. A special thank you, obviously, to David. I've lost you on my screen, David, but thank you and a big hug. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I'd like to leave people. Can I leave people with one final thought, which I think puts a sort of overcap on all of this? If we look at what's happening in medicine, for example, the new medical advances. I was just reading last week that the speed from the 1950s, it would take 50 years to double the amount of medical knowledge. Up until 2014 or 16 or something like that, it happened in 7 years, and they expect it to happen within 5 years. So but we've now just doubled in the last 5 years. So that's the kind of figure that we're seeing. That's what's happening in the world around us. Now, all aspects of our world may not be changing that fast, but is coaching and mentoring, or are coaching and mentoring and the professional bodies geared up to keep us changing sufficiently in tune to that? So are we behind the curve, on top of the curve, or in front of the curve in terms of the changing of ourselves and of the profession? I think this is a really big challenge, and I don't have any answer, but I guess it's part of my job to go ask questions like that.
Yeah. Big questions. Thank you. So we're going to keep the room open now for another half an hour. And so you can carry on networking if you'd like to. And I'd just like to close by thanking EMCC Global for really enabling this discussion to happen in the first place. So go well, guys, and thanks again.